Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into some really fascinating, maybe even mind-bending ideas from speculativity theory.
Hmm.
Our goal is really to distill its core concepts, around form, light, and time. And we'll take a look at these speculative equations that introduces.
Right.
Think of it like this. We're exploring a perspective that suggests, well, everything we see, everything we experience as form, is fundamentally a projection of light.
And that light itself is tied back to the tiniest particles.
Exactly.
Yeah, and what's really striking, I think, is this idea that's quite counterintuitive.
Which part?
Well, that without light, form doesn't just become invisible, it actually disperses. It loses its cohesion, its ability to hold together.
Really? So no stability without light.
According to this theory, yeah. No light means no perception, and crucially, no stable forms. It really flips how we usually think about seeing things, about existence itself.
Absolutely. And then there's time,
Yeah.
which is also treated very differently here.
Oh, definitely.
Forget the idea of a constant ticking clock. Here, time is defined as, and this is a quote, the instant of perception and the destructive instant of perception.
Right. So it's linked to the act of perceiving.
All right, it's not about time slowing down at light speed in the usual relativity sense,
Yeah.
but that the very act of something registering coming into being for us, that act is inherently tied to this concept of time.
Okay.
Okay, so to get a handle on this, let's jump into the first piece of the puzzle they offer. The pre-existential energy equation.
Right. So this equation looks like pre-existential energy, PE, FFXE. It's basically an attempt to describe the nature of energy before it manifests in the universe we can observe.
Okay, let's break that down. P is potential.
P stands for potential, yes. Now, FE, that's frequency raised to the power of infinity.
Infinity. Wow, so what does that represent?
Think of it like this. Imagine a field, right? A field of pure potential, but with this unbelievable level of underlying activity. An oscillation happening at an infinitely rapid rate. So even if it appears as, stillness or even nothingness, there's this immense hidden energy or frequency.
So it's like a latent energy, maybe?
Yeah.
A kind of buzzing stillness before anything actually happens?
That's a good way to put it. And then we have today, which is time raised to the power of 0.
And anything to the power of 0 equals 1, right?
Exactly. So what that implies is that at this really fundamental pre-existential level, time as we experience it, with duration and flow, it doesn't really have a defining influence yet.
So it's almost negligible at that stage.
It's almost as if this pre-existential state exists, perhaps outside of the kind of time we normally measure and perceive. The theory even links this state to something called a spirit energy.
Okay.
But the key takeaway, I think, is that this equation is trying to give us a language, a way to conceptualize energy before the emergence of what we generally consider reality.
The raw potential.
Exactly. The raw potential from which everything else might arise.
Okay, so if that's the potential, how does it actually become, the particles and mass we see all around us? What's the process there?
Well, the theory proposes that this energy undergoes a process. It diffracts and refracts.
Like light through a prism.
Sort of, but it happens through something called recursive time oscillation. Imagine energy being bent and shaped as it moves through these incredibly rapid repeating cycles of time.
Okay, recursive time oscillation.
Yeah, and this process creates sequences, modulations, patterns, essentially turning that raw energy into particles and mass over these varying tiny time intervals.
And that leads us to another equation.
It brings us to the life energy equation. This one's a bit more involved.
Okay, let's see it.
It's EAE-AFKTW. And the unit they give for this energy is IAG, symbolized as alpha.
Right, E is approximately P times F to the K, divided by T to the W. Okay, let's unpack this one too. E is life energy.
Yeah, E represents life energy, and it's associated with really everything non-evolving things, evolving things, like rocks, plants, animals.
The whole spectrum.
The whole spectrum. We still have P for potential.
Okay.
And F for frequency. But here the unit for frequency is something called spirit say.
Spirit say. Interesting name.
Then there's K. Now, K is described as an imaginary exponential rate of frequency at the initial instant of perception.
Whoa, okay. Imaginary exponential rate at the initial instant of perception. That sounds really crucial, like the moment something first registers.
Precisely. This K factor really highlights the critical role of that very first moment of awareness or interaction, perhaps, in actually shaping what takes form.
Okay, and T is time.
T is time, yes, but with a specific unit called I life, symbolized as omega. It represents the duration involved in this process of formation or existence.
I life. Got it. And W.
W is another interesting one. It's the imaginary exponential rate at which time t has done work to the instant there is an increase in perception or form.
Time has done work.
Yes, so time isn't just passively flowing by in this model, it's actively participating. It's doing work, in a sense, to shape or manifest what we perceive.
That's a very different view of time. So, looking at the whole equation, AFK to what does it tell us about how time and energy interact in forming, say, particles or matter? Is there a balance?
Absolutely. There's a direct relationship described. The theory states that within this equation, the higher the time, the lower the energy.
Higher T means lower E.
Exactly. Think of time here, perhaps, in that destructive instant aspect mentioned earlier. If the duration t involved in forming something, or even just maintaining it, is very high, then the available energy E associated with it becomes lower. The theory suggests this could relate to why things wear out or break down over long periods.
Makes sense, like entropy in a way.
Kind of, and conversely, if the time t involved is too short, then the energy E is too high.
And that's also bad.
Well, it could prevent stable bonds from forming in the first place. Or maybe cause things that do form to just disperse quickly. Too much energy, not enough stability.
Right.
And here's quite a thought. If time t were an imaginary zero in this context.
An imaginary zero.
Yeah. The implication is that the very sense of existence, things having a stable form, space itself, it would dissolve.
Wow. So time is fundamental to structure.
It really positions time as this fundamental regulator of energy. It influences how space and forms even come into being and persist.
It really is a delicate balance, then, this interplay. Now, you mentioned this is the life-energy equation, but the theory has others derived from it, right?
Yes, there are derived forms that rearrange the variables to offer different perspectives.
Okay, let's look at the lifetime energy equation. That's TAPAFKAWE. What's the key shift here?
So this one flips the relationship we just talked about. Here, it states, the higher the energy, the lower the time. Higher E means lower T.
Okay, what does that imply?
The theory connects this high-energy, low-time state to an inchoate stage of correlative loose properties of matter.
Inchoate stage, like unformed.
Sort of. Imagine a state where energy is really high, things are fluctuating incredibly rapidly, and stable, long-lasting forms haven't quite, solidified yet. It's perhaps a more transient, less defined state of being.
That makes intuitive sense, actually. A super high energy state might not allow for the kinds of stable structure that can persist over longer timescales.
Exactly. Things haven't settled down yet, so to speak.
Okay. And then there's the life potential energy equation, PAETWAKAFK. What insight does this version offer?
This one focuses on the relationship between frequency and potential, and it's an inverse one. The higher the frequency, the lower the potential equals to plus-minus perception or nothingness.
Higher frequency, lower potential equals perception or nothingness. That's cryptic.
It is a bit dense, but think of it maybe like this. If something is oscillating or happening extremely rapidly, very high frequency F, then the underlying drive, or let's say the potential P for something new to emerge or be strongly desired, might be lower.
Why would that be?
Well, it's almost as if the high level of activity is the state. It's so active, there's less latent potential waiting to manifest, perhaps. The system is already fully engaged.
Interesting. So high activity, lower drive for something more, or maybe lower inherent value.
Perhaps. And then finally, we have the life energy frequency equation. Frequency, PWA, PP.
Okay, so now we're solving for frequency F.
Right. And this shows the inverse relationship again, but now between potential and frequency. The higher the potential, the lower the frequency equals to existential evolution.
Higher potential, lower frequency equals evolution.
That's the connection they make. And then it loops back to that earlier idea. Nothingness is potential with exponential frequency.
Okay, wait. Nothingness is high potential and infinite frequency.
That's the pre-existential state, yeah. Potential with infinitely exponential frequency. But for actual existence, for evolution, you need relatively lower frequency driven by potential.
So existence itself relies on finding a balance, not the infinite frequency of nothingness, but not zero frequency either.
Exactly. It suggests existence operates within certain relative levels of frequency. Too high, and maybe it remains unmanifest potential. Too low, and perhaps it lacks the dynamic quality needed for form or evolution. It's about finding that kind of operational sweet spot between potential and activity.
These are definitely abstract concepts. I'm trying to picture them. Do we have any maybe everyday analogies that could help us grasp these relationships a bit more intuitively between energy, time, frequency, potential?
Yeah, the theory does suggest some analogies, though of course they're just analogies. For the main energy equation, higher time, lower energy, EATW.
Right.
Think about how you feel after a really long workday, or maybe a long journey. You've put in a lot of time, right? Higher T,
Definitely feel drained, yeah.
your available energy, E, is much lower. You feel exhausted. Or, compare the general energy levels we associate with young age versus old age as time progresses through life.
Okay, that makes sense. Higher time, lower energy. What about the time equation? Higher energy, lower time.
For that one, imagine an athlete. Let's say they try to sprint a full marathon.
Okay, bad idea.
Right. They start with this huge burst of energy, incredibly high E. But how long can they maintain that?
Not long at all.
Exactly. Their effective time T at that extreme energy output is very low. They won't cover much of the marathon distance running like that. High energy leads to a shorter duration of that state.
Got it. High energy expenditure burns out quickly, shorter effective time.
Okay.
Okay. What about the frequency and potential ones? You mentioned plenty versus scarcity as an analogy.
Yes, that can be a helpful way to think about those inverse relationships. So for higher frequency, lower potential, PFF, think of abundance.
Yep.
If something is readily available, it happens all the time, it's everywhere, high frequency F, we tend to value it less, right? Or we don't desire it as strongly. The potential P, maybe the perceived value or the craving, is lower.
Like air. We don't usually crave air.
Exactly. It's high frequency all around us. We only feel its potential value, its necessity, when it becomes scarce, right? When the frequency drops.
Makes sense.
And conversely, for higher potential, lower frequency, FFP, think scarcity.
The opposite.
Yeah. When something is rare, it doesn't happen often low frequency F. Its perceived value, our desire for it, the potential P associated with it, increases significantly.
Like a rare gemstone or a once-in-a-lifetime event.
Precisely. It's that basic economic or psychological principle. The less there is of something, the lower its frequency, the more potential value or desire it seems to hold. It whets the appetite, so to speak.
These analogies are helpful, actually. They ground these pretty abstract equations a little. So are these equations just meant for physics or cosmology or...
No, and that's a key point. The theory explicitly proposes that these speculative equations aren't limited to just one domain. They're intended to provide a fundamental framework for understanding activities across the board, both non-physical, maybe mental or conceptual activities, and physical ones.
Which is why they call it the life equation.
Exactly. Or sometimes even the universal equation. It's really an attempt, however speculative, to find a basic mathematical language that could potentially describe existence in its totality.
Well, this has certainly been a deep dive, as advertised, into some incredibly thought-provoking, and I have to admit, quite mind-bending territory.
It definitely challenges conventional thinking.
We've explored speculativity theory's core ideas, this really intimate link between light and form.
Form dissolving without light.
Right, and the dynamic, very active role of time. Not just as a measure, but as perception itself, both creative and destructive.
Yeah, time is the shaper.
And then this ambitious mathematical system trying to connect energy, time, frequency, potential, all in the very emergence of our reality.
I think what's really significant to maybe sit with is that idea of time not being just a passive backdrop we move through, but this dynamic force actively involved in shaping what we perceive as real and how it's intrinsically linked to both our awareness and the eventual, fading or dissipation of form.
A destructive instant.
Exactly. And just the sheer interconnectedness implied here. Concepts we often treat as separate: energy, perception, time, potential, the fabric of existence itself. They're all seemingly woven together through the lens of these, speculative equations.
It's a very holistic view, in a way.
It aims to be, yes.
So, for you, the listener, here's something to perhaps mull over. How might this idea, this concept of time, as both the moment something comes into being for you and also its eventual fading away, how might that reshape how you think about the present moment? Or about nature of change itself, and maybe what other everyday things, phenomena, might you now look at through this lens? Pondering that constant interplay the theory suggests between energy, time, frequency, and potential.
It certainly gives you a different framework to consider.
It really does. A lot to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.